Hey everyone, well, happy Tuesday. We are headed back to Washington, D.C. for week 3 of the shutdown. And unfortunately, according to reports out of the White House and Republican leadership, there is no plan to end the shutdown soon. In fact, they are talking about battening down the hatches for a long shutdown. Now, I want to talk a little bit this morning while I'm in transit, headed back to DC, about the bigger picture of what the shutdown is about, why we think that they're taking the positions that they are, and why there is a complete unwillingness whatsoever to negotiate in good faith on behalf of the American people. In fact, it was reported that over the weekend, the White House reported that they were going to try to take existing balances and repurpose them so that they could shore up funding for troops and for law enforcement, which is a good thing. But they're unwilling to do it lawfully using the constitutionally mandated process of appropriations and bringing Congress back into session. In fact, the Republicans are now saying they have no plan to bring the House back at all anytime soon. In fact, House Democrats are headed back to D.C. for week 3 of a lockout, essentially. I mean, Mike Johnson, the Speaker, has zero plans to bring his members back anytime soon and is openly bragging about it. And I think one of the things that I find interesting about this moment is that the White House also reportedly over the weekend was bragging about their absolute control over the congressional process. And it got me to thinking about the bigger picture, which I think a lot of people have been pointing out, which is the ways in which this White House is mirroring other countries that the president has admired their leaders. Folks like Viktor Orban, Putin, and others who have essentially consolidated executive power through a series of coercive controls. So I want to break it all down. You know, over the last 9.5 months, we have seen a White House that has consolidated centralized control increasingly, has gone after the checks and balances and Constitution of the United States, that has gone after the judiciary and tried to undermine judicial power, has gone after congressional authority and tried to consolidate legislative authority under the executive branch by breaking not only the law but rules and norms that have been in place since our founding fathers. They've tried to suppress the press and actively gone after the press. They're using the tools of the state to go after their named enemies. They're trying to quash dissent in the streets. In fact, over the last several days, we've seen statements coming out of Republican leadership about protests and efforts to exercise free speech, that they are planning to crack down on it. And, we saw the president sign an executive order about this a few days ago and actually brag and use the words that he was shutting down free speech. And so when you look at it in its totality, this effort mirrors exactly what happened in places like Hungary and places like Russia. And this is not by accident. In fact, if you've been following the rightward lean of the Republican Party over the last several years, you would actually see that Republicans have been actually holding conferences in Hungary with Orban and his associates to learn from them. In fact, this is not out of the blue. And in fact, if you look at Project 2025, which is the policy framework and the mechanism that the organizations that are supporting the presidency use to recruit loyalists to put into place this agenda, what stands behind all of that is essentially a handful of extraordinarily wealthy billionaires who have associations with these very far right-wing organizations like the Birch Society, and that have also been funding efforts, of course, to pack the court with these ultra-conservative justices. And so this is not just a bunch of one-offs that are happening in isolation. This is really a effort to consolidate power and to remake American society, to reshape American governance in a different way than it has been evolving through the democratic process over the last half century. And it is a very concerted, very well funded, we're talking tens of millions of dollars being pumped into this effort, and all the organizations that support it. And now the use of coercive control by the White House to try to break the American people and to try to break the wills of the democratically elected representatives of the people like us. But here's the thing. Some of you may not know this, but I have a graduate degree in sociology. And in classic sociology, you read the works of Max Weber, who spent most of his career studying power. And in his seminal work, he broke down what ultimately power rests on. And what he found over the study of world history is that coercive control is unstable. It always falls apart in the end because it doesn't rely on legitimate authority. It relies on fear, it relies on abuse, the threat of violence, the use of the state to coerce people into doing things that they wouldn't naturally do or support. And so because of that, it ultimately is unstable. And the most stable forms of government and democracy are based on institutions and norms and, of course, the consent of the governed, which is exactly what democracy is. And so democracy is a practice. And the reason why I'm breaking this all down is that I believe that this moment, more than anything, and all of the signs that are coming out of the White House, is that they are trying to break our will. It's not about a shutdown. It's not about fixing healthcare for them. They are trying to break the will of the American people through coercive control so that they ultimately can remake government and society. And they're not even hiding it. They're talking about it openly and they're bragging about it. And so the reason why I think it's important to understand that context is because that means we need to continue to show up, to speak up, to fight back, and to continue to practice democracy every single day in all its forms. And so House Democrats are headed back to DC. We know that the House is not in session, but we are going to continue to demand a bipartisan solution to reopen the government, to pay our federal workers, to fix your health care, and to end the abuse of power and the American people. Because this is our democracy, and that depends on all of us showing up to do our jobs. So, as always, I'm going to get on a plane and go do my job. And I hope all of you have a happy Tuesday. I know it's a rough week, but I'm sending you all a lot of love and all of the good fall things that give you joy. And I will see you all on the other side. See you all.